Good morning, everyone. This week is Class 2, and I have our lesson plan up here. I've titled it Components of Visual Effects and Animated Material Basics. So I have two line items here at the top of the lesson plan. And I just have these defined here. We're going to talk about these in more detail during class. I have a couple really great videos related to these, but they aren't public videos, so we have to watch them together. As opposed to me just giving you links to them. But these are, it's important to know what type of effects we can create, and I think we discussed this a little bit last week. But then even more importantly, or equally as important, is breaking down the components of an appealing visual effect. The gameplay, the timing, shape, contrast, color, theme. Every aspect of design, visual design, has some type of guiding principles, and these are some of the ones that we've come up with for visual effects to help you figure out how to layer and create depth and appeal to your visual effects. So we'll take a look at these in more detail during class. For the technical lecture here, the pre-recorded lecture, I'm going to be covering mostly item 3, which is some of the basics for animating textures, which is a panner node, a rotator node, and dealing with alpha channels. So I actually have two examples that I've already set up in Unreal Engine, and it uses all of these: the panner, the rotator, and the alpha channel. So I'm gonna step through that now, and give you a rundown of how they work. And there's a few other nodes that I threw in there too. Now our assignment for next week will be a production assignment. This is one of the 5-point assignments. So I want you to do this following LinkedIn Learning course, actually just one module within this course. So remember, we get to LinkedIn Learning from the student portal. Don't try to go to LinkedIn Learning directly. It won't allow you to log in, so you have to go through your student portal on the Becker website. So once you get there, you just type this in, put this in the search box. This is the name of the course, Unreal Introduction to Unreal Materials. And I want you to watch Module 4. Now you could watch all of them. If you're still feeling shaky or a little rusty on materials, you could watch the whole course. But in particular, I want you to focus on Module 4, which are certain nodes related to material effects. So once you complete that lesson, I would like you to create a new project with the starter content. That's just an option when we create a new project. And the reason I want you to use the starter content is because it has some texture maps in there you can experiment with. And then what I would like for you to do is use one or more of the starter content texture maps to design an animated material. Now there's really no specifications to this material or this animated material. I just want you to experiment with it and get used to working in the material editor, in particular using the panner and or rotator nodes to animate your texture. So once you've completed it, keep this really simple. I just want you to take a screenshot of the material editor. So, and in that screenshot, I want to be able to see the thumbnail of the material and the materials node network. So for instance here, let me just pull up Unreal Engine. I have two materials. These are the two that I'm going to show in a few minutes. So if I open one of these up, and it's way too big. Let me put it here. So over here you're seeing the material effect. I'm going to put it on a plane or preview it on a plane instead of a sphere. So here's the one effect, and I'm just going to zoom out so I can see all of the nodes that created that animated material. So this is what I want you to take a screenshot of: the thumbnail and the node network. And then you'll just submit those for class next week, before class starts next week. So that's our assignment for next week. So let me just do a walkthrough of these two materials. This will basically show what I'm covering in the lesson plan here. So I'm actually going to start with this one. This one uses a panner. So I'm going to double click to open that up. And let me just put my lesson plan over here to the side. And okay, so a couple things to keep in mind when you're doing animated materials One of the most important things is that you almost always will be using opacity or masking in some way. Very rarely is our material effect, going to be applied across the whole surface. I mean, it's applied across the whole surface, but it masks areas out. So what I have here is you can see I have a couple nodes that are being piped into the opacity. Now, when you create a material for the first time, this is going to be grayed out because by default, a new material over here in the details panel is set to opaque, which will gray these out. See how that's grayed out now? So we typically, when we're working with animated materials for visual effects, we're working with either a masked or translucent blending mode. And they're a little bit different. So translucent will give you access to an opacity channel or pin, and masked will give you access to an opacity mask. Now the difference here is that masked is either on or off. It's either masked away completely or it's not. Whereas translucent gives us varying levels of transparency. That's the difference between those two. So just keep that in mind also. So I'm using translucent because I'm generating a gradient that determines where this effect is being masked. So I basically just have a base color in here. And the way we create a single color in Unreal Engine is by using the constant 3 vector. So if I right click in here and type in CON for constant, right there it is, a constant 3 vector. That's what this is. So the name is a little bit confusing because a vector is usually a direction in space, but if you think about it, it's basically 3 pieces of data, X, Y, and Z. Well, we can just use that data to be RGB, or red, blue, green, and then we get our color combination. So that's why a vector, a constant 3 vector, is how we generate solid colors. And then everything else is happening here in the opacity channel. So you see if I remove that opacity pin, I just have a solid red material. So I'll wire this back in. So how did I create this? Well, I'm using 2 panners, and I'm using them to move what's called a generated band. This is a certain type of sort of, I guess you could call it an internal procedural texture map. So if I right click in here and type in generated band, here's a generated band. Oh, we don't get a preview on this one, I forgot. So, some of them have a little drop box here in the corner and you can preview it. Actually, I might be able to, let's try it here. Another way to preview a node is to right click on it and choose enable or start previewing node right there. Start previewing node. Oh, there we go. That works. Let me have a look at it here on a plane. So you can see it's like a gradient band. That's what it creates. Now we have different parameters here we can put in to change it. So again, I'm showing this one because the generated band is something that we use a lot also. So I can wire in constants into these in order to get to reshape it. So for instance, for width, I'm going to add just a constant as opposed to a constant 3 vector. A constant gives me just a single value. And if I increase that, we'll see that I'm starting to get a band there, and I can make it really thin. Oops, that's too thin. Really thin, or I can make it really thick. So that's its width. So these all will take various constants, among other things, to reshape it. So that's what this is. It's a generated band. Pretty simple, but very useful. So the first one I have here, I'll preview this one. So I'll do start preview node also. And we see it's just running that band from bottom to top. Now it's doing that. So you notice here I do have a constant width, which is 0.08, and then some other decimal places. And then the big thing here is the panner node, which we get by just typing in PAN for panner, and it's right there. There's the panner node. Now the panner node has speed X and Y. I wanted it to just go straight up. So I added a 0.5 for my Y speed. And with the generated band node, that gets wired into the coordinates. So basically it's changing the UV coordinates on this generated band. It's animating them, and that's what makes it look like it's moving in this direction. And then I have a second one here. So let me preview this one instead. Doesn't look much different, and it's not. Actually, the only difference here is that I've given it a constant node in the offset. So it's a little offset from this band. So that's how I can get them to be staggered. So if I preview the add node, so this is another node that I use. So add is what we typically will use to add together something, in this case, alpha channels. We're just adding the one black and white value to the other black and white value, and then that gives me my mask. So if I preview this one, see, there's the two bands. See how the one's just slightly offset from the other? And if I take this constant here on the offset and increase it to maybe 2, I'll get a little more spacing between them. There we go. That might be a little too much. How about 1.5? Oh, that's almost perfect spacing right there. So that's the add node. Now when I'm done previewing here, I can just say stop preview node. I'm just right-clicking on the node to do this. And then that's wired into opacity, and that gives me my effect. So pretty simple. Just solid constant 3 vector for the color. Then I have 2 generated bands. They're both using a panner node in their UV coordinate inputs. And then I also changed their width with a constant node. And then for the second generated band, I'm using an offset so that it's not on top of the other one. It gives me that staggered offset. And then I'm adding the 2 animated generated bands together and using those for my opacity or mask. And that's how I created that first effect that we see there. And again, I'm previewing it on a plane. I could preview it if I wanted to on a cylinder or a sphere, or whatever. I typically find that looking at them on a plane is the most beneficial. All right, so the second one I have here is roughly the same thing, but instead of a panner, I am using a rotator. So same thing here, I have a material, and the material has been set to translucent, so I have access to the opacity pin. And here I've actually added an additional layer. So I have my generated bands. So if I preview those, right click on it and preview. And let's go ahead and look at those on a plane so it's easier to see. So you can see there's the first one. So it has a width, a constant for the width. And then I'm just using the rotator. This is the other basic texture animator we have. The rotator's going into the input, the UV coordinate input, and then you just decide what your speed is here. And then the second one here, if I preview that one, is basically the same thing. It's just spinning a little bit faster. This one is spinning at a speed of 10. And then I've added those two together. So I'll preview that. There we go. Now, I did add an additional node here called a radial gradient exponential. And the reason for that is because I don't want to see these sharp edges if I put this on something like a plane or an object in the scene, in my level that is, flat. What this is going to look like is, let's stop previewing here, and I'm going to wire the add node right into opacity, and let's see what happens. See how I see those edges? So what I wanted to do was I wanted to further refine my opacity mask by using what's called a radial gradient exponential. This is another very useful node. So again, I just come over here and type in radial, and it should pop right up, radial, right there it is, radial gradient exponential. So if we preview this node to see what it is, This is fantastic. It's just it goes from white to black. So the areas that are white we'll see, the areas that are black will be masked away. Now I want to add that to my generated band here as a mask. So you can see how that'll work because it'll fade away at the edges. So the trick to that is that this is not an addition. I have to do a multiply. Addition would just add them together. Let's see, I could show you what an addition would look like here. So if I put down another add node and I add this, the bands with the radial gradient, and preview that, see, that doesn't give me what I want. That would look weird. If I wire that into my opacity. Oh, and I need to stop previewing. See, that's not what I want. I just now have a little bit, I have a little bit of red here in the center. So this is where multiply works. So if we just simply want to add one on top of the other, we use the add node. Multiply will, multiply is actually multiplying light and dark values. And where the dark values are is where it keeps it, and where the light values are, it would mask it away. So that's why a multiply works here instead. So if I preview the multiply, that's the effect that I want. So you can see it's feathering off the edges of those bands, setting them to black so that they'll be transparent, right at the edge of that radial gradient. See, right there is where it masks it away. So the radial gradient multiplied by those generated bands gives me this effect, and that gives me the perfect mask that I'm looking for here. Just like that. So these two examples are pretty basic, but these are the fundamentals we want to understand first. We want to understand the two most basic ways to animate textures, which is the panner and the rotator, and then also how we apply those or make masks out of them and apply them to either the opacity or the opacity mask channel if we're doing a if we are doing a masked material instead. But actually I find most of the time when we're doing visual effects, because our transparency needs to fade, we typically always use a translucent material. All right, so I think that's everything that I wanted to cover here. Boy, this is only a 17-minute lecture. That's quick. But we have a lot to cover in class today together. When I come back up here, the components of an appealing visual effect and the types of effects are, I think that's probably about 15 minutes of videos that we're going to take a look at in class. Yeah, so again, we talked here about panners, the rotator, two basic, very heavily used visual effects nodes for materials. Our alpha channel, that's our transparency, working with alpha channels. And then I have my two examples here that I just kind of outlined a little more. So again, for next week, you're going to go through this LinkedIn Learning courses module 4, which are material effects. And I just want you to experiment with the textures in the starter content and see what kind of animated material you can come up with. So just sort of a basic assignment to get us warmed up on this. So I think I will stop the lesson, the recorded lesson here, and I will see everybody today in class at 2:30. 2:30 today. I was thinking 1:20 again, but you have, well, you should be able to get through this video lecture pretty quickly because it's only about 20 minutes. So we'll have plenty of time to go through this, and then we'll meet together in teams at 2:30, and we'll take a look at the back up here, we'll take a look at the videos I have for components of visual effects and types of effects. So I will see everybody then.